Welcome to another edition of Cults and the Culting of America podcast. My name is Scot Loyd, along with knitting cult lady Daniella Mestyanek Young, also Captain Daniella, former intelligence Army officer. And I think your expertise will come in handy considering that as we're going to tape this episode today, Secretary of War, as he's calling himself, Pete Hegseth, gave an address to, I suppose, all of the generals, all of the admirals, all of the people that are in the military that are in leadership posts, and it was mind blowing. It was dystopian. I'm not sure what I was witnessing, but maybe you can bring some insight into what we witnessed, and we'll talk about some other things as well. But I think this is really illustrative of so much of what we talk about on this program, Daniella, and certainly your expertise in this area comes to bear. So one of the big questions that I had just right off the bat was Secretary Hegseth made this statement, and we'll get into some of the other outrageous things that he said, but he said, from this point forward, we're only having male standards of fitness. And my immediate question is, we still have women joining the military, though, right? So what does that mean for women who are joining the military now?
Yeah. So first of all, I just have to say that like all of the standards are made up, right? And you are probably familiar with the term professionalism, being a scholar of race and the way that that is utilized primarily to keep the white male status quo in power.
Right.
Standards is the military's version of that, right? So at some point, they decided you had to be a certain amount of physical fit to join the military, right? They basically made that up. And then they wrote down these standards and they said, okay, this is what a physically fit man can do. And
does
this
it
is what
literally mean like you can do X number of push-ups, X number of pull-ups,
that's
something
how
like
they
that? Okay.
measure it. Well, how they measured it during my day was how many push-ups you can do in 2 minutes, how many sit-ups you can do in 2 minutes, and how fast you can run 2 miles in. And they've added some additional things in. But this is one of those things I talk about where I'm like, men made this up. Then they made up the fact that women need different standards. So then they made up different standards for women. And then they used those standards to keep women out. So in my day, when we were serving under the combat ban, it was all like, whoa, you women, you want equality? Okay, same standards. And every single one of us who was trying to be in this fight for equality was like, absolutely, please, let's go. But, overall, like, and first of all, I just need to point out that every time people say gender neutral, they don't mean gender neutral. They mean male. You really find this out when you knit baby items for people, because you could put every color of the rainbow in a blanket, but heaven forbid you put pink, because then it's a girl blanket, right? So it never means gender neutral. It always means male. They're made up in the first place, and it's just another way to try to keep the status quo. And talking about the beards, the shaving
Yeah.
profiles, they call it, like that is dog whistle racism right
And
there.
he uses language like no beardos. I guess he was trying to say weirdos, and that's the first time I've heard that terminology.
Yeah, I mean, in the military, the men have to be clean shaven, right? And it's a really big deal. And again, they'll go on and on and on about how it's basically professionalism. Black men have a much harder time shaving every day than white men do. And they end up with this condition called folliculitis, which causes like facial scarring, huge amounts of pain, right? And so when he's saying we're not going to have any beardos, right? He's literally saying, I want to target black men. When he's saying we're going to have gender neutral male haircuts, gender neutral male is a contradiction, but he's saying that the women are going to have that same haircut that you see in military men, which like, that's a big deal, right? Like that really targets the women who are already committing to an incredibly hard career. And now you want us to commit to this absolutely like masculine appearance, but no trans people. And, it's all so ridiculous. And part of why I've realized that I dress the way I dress and do the things that I do, right? And like wear a corset with cleavage and my combat badge right there is really kind of not just poking fun at this, but proving how ridiculous it is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it just and anyway, I know that we are here today to actually talk about your book, but I think every woman veteran is just in a rage today because it
Yeah.
really and you know how we have talked, like, we feel like with the administration, the Christian extremists got the White House, and with the Secretary of War, very it's giving, "Mom, I wanna pick my own nickname." It's just like our worst coworker got the Department of Defense. Like, that
Yeah.
man literally who has been accused, credibly accused of stood there and said, you know, "We're not gonna take any more anonymous reporting," which really protects victims,
Right.
"and we're not gonna let little mistakes bother your career," right? And basically, I mean, the military has always been a very, very dangerous place for women, wrote a book about that, and it's just he's just trying to go backwards, and it's not gonna work,
And I
but
want to
it
ask you
is
about that. There was a lot of rhetoric that bothered me today, but the overall tone was almost like this guy was relishing the fact that he is in charge of a group of people. He was chomping at the bit, right, to kill people. And he even used the language. And I haven't heard this language in years. The first place that I heard it back when I was a full throated conservative, I would listen to Rush Limbaugh, and he often described the army and the military as their purpose and their mission was to kill people and break things. And that was the exact language that came out of his mouth today, as he was
Mhm.
describing the mission of the military, and this whole idea of rebranding it, of bringing back the old notion of the Department of War. And then you couple that with the president of the United States, the commander in chief, getting up and saying, well, maybe we could use some of these cities as practice for the military and urban warfare. And we're talking about American cities. We're talking about American citizens. And it just really does blow my mind. So first of all, I know that just watching your channel of late in your content, you've gone a long way to sort of assuage the fears of people on the left. And maybe I'm feeling a little bit of that panic as well today, right? Because listening to all of this rhetoric, but you've gone a long way in helping people understand that you don't think that the military can be turned against the American people. You want to talk a little bit about that in light of the rhetoric that we heard today?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously really scary what he said today, but I would say, like, he's been saying this the whole time, right? Which is why people have been scared from the beginning. He's been saying, you know, he wants to use the military. It's a long way from him saying something to like the military taking actual action. And I
Yeah,
think we
he
can
says a lot of
see,
all the
like,
time.
the
So
same
yeah,
way we saw in the parade, like, the military is not trying to be his tool. Right? Now, it's like I was hoping that they would be stupid enough to actually try some kind of loyalty pledge, right? Because that would be the one way I think we could see actually the
well,
military
he got
remove
close, right?
a
He
leader.
got close. He got close. He said, if you don't like it, you can walk out. Of course, it means your career and your
Yeah, and
rank. And
they're
even
kind
Hegseth said, if your heart is sinking right now, you can do the honorable thing and resign.
yeah, and again, I'm gonna go with like they're saying that, but that's not how the military works. Right? Like it is like I feel like I've heard this speech from so many colonels and it's always like rah rah rah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to work out every day, you know, and like some things spin up for like a few weeks. I still think that really he would be really hard pressed to use the American military against American citizens because to
I
what
agree.
end?
Yeah.
Right? Like the military is made out of Americans. Like, even if you saw that room of generals, there were so many Black, not white men, and even women in that crowd of generals, right? The modern military, when you look at graduating classes right now, the military is 20% women. If all the women just quit, he wouldn't be able to do anything. And, there's only so far people are going to go before they just say no. Okay, I'll lose my job. Okay, I'll lose my rank, right? He doesn't really have much to threaten with. And saying to a bunch of generals, sit here quietly or walk out and lose your rank, right? These people have dedicated on average more than 30 years of their life. They're going to be very careful and very political. Fortunately, they're not the ones carrying the guns and doing the lethal activity, right? And I have said this from the beginning as well, that like in the end, when it comes down to him actually giving some really illegal orders, like I think the thing that's going to stop it from being as bad as it could be is the privates and the junior officers and like the character of the young people that are in our military that do not want to be in this toxic vet bro culture. But so far, not a lot of people standing up to him.
Talk a little bit, if you will, about basic training, because Hegseth also said, that we're going to go back to, drill sergeants doing whatever they can to break people down. And I've heard you talk before about what basic training looked like before. I think it was World War II, or maybe it was developed during World War II or Vietnam or something, as opposed to what it is today or what it's become. And I believe, if memory serves, you've advocated for a return to what basic training used to be, where you didn't take away the infantryman's ability to think for themselves, or something of that nature. I
Yeah, I mean,
recall you talking about that.
there's a definite tactic of brainwashing, of like mind breaking, personality breaking that we use in the military. It's the same thing that's used in the troubled teen industry, which we just, talked about a few episodes ago. And it's the same thing used by abusers. In fact, when the US sort of discovered brainwashing in the late 60s, their response was to say, let's use this on soldiers. And they put together a group of psychologists who built modern day basic training, and those psychologists specialized in abusive relationships and cults. And this is also seeded into corporate America, and all these things have influenced each other. Now, I argue that you don't have to brainwash soldiers to go to war. I don't think we ever had to. I think that it's always been a vocation that some people will choose for a number of reasons. And humans are professionals. Humans will do their job. You train together, you fight as a unit, you care about each other. Like all of the stuff we do in the actual army didn't require us to be broken, I don't think. Right.
Right.
But also, not a chance in hell Keg's Breath knows a thing that he's talking about regarding even the basic training that he's talking about, right? He's talking about some locker room that he's heard about from guys 20 years his senior, that he's heard about from 20 years his senior. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So go ahead. Go ahead
Yeah.
and tell modern day drill sergeants they can start punching soldiers in the face. See how that goes for you in a modern world with a modern army. You're gonna bring in a lot of legal procedures and a lot of court cases into supervising your training all of a sudden, I think. And I just, again, like, the cult members have the power, and they're so dumb and not good at this and blind, but that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Right? Like,
Yeah.
they still have the power and they're actively hurting people.
It's almost like he, in that speech today, he's doing what so many of these Trump administrators do. They make the speeches and they say what they say for an audience of one. They're appealing to what they think Donald Trump wants to hear, and to hell with whoever they're serving or whoever they're called to direct. So maybe there was a lot of that going on as well,
And
because
it's also
that sounded like something that Donald Trump would think that the military should be. It's almost like a
yes,
cartoon character, you know?
yes. And it's also what he thinks the military wants to hear. It's what Pete Hegseth thinks the military wants to hear, because he's always been that toxic, loudest bro in the room that doesn't listen to anyone else's side, right? This is why I always say, like, when Uncultured was coming out, right? And my publishing house was like, okay, so what happens if, like, this book goes super viral, right? And now you're on Fox News and you have to debate, like, the angry general, right? Pete Hegs, right? And I literally said to them, I said, it was a room of 6 women that I was talking to. And I was like, ladies, I promise you that any man they send to debate me on these topics about being a woman in the military and how toxic the military is for women, which is the huge theme of Uncultured, like, they're going to just have been briefed on this right before they walked in. Right. But, like, I lived in their world. They never
Yeah.
even deigned to listen to our side, but I know him, and every veteran and active duty soldier who doesn't want to be in this modern toxic masculinity vet bro military knows that guy. And that guy thinks that all the straight white dudes think like him, and also thinks there's more of them than there are. And that, the modern military, the United States Department of Defense is one of the most diverse organizations in the world. And it's made out of literally Americans from every walk of life. And I just don't see, like, actual weaponization of the military being a thing that they can really pull off. But it gets more and more dystopian every day.
And just for the record, remind me of Hegseth's career in the military. What is his story? What is his credentials? Aren't all that stellar, are they?
No. So he was a major in the National Guard. So a major
In
is
the
the
National
fourth
Guard.
in the fourth rank of officer, but National Guard means you're doing it 1 weekend a month and then 2 weeks in the summer, right? So a major in the National Guard, I believe, has about as much active time as a lower ranking sergeant. So probably like 2 full years total. I know he did deploy. I think he deployed. I can't remember if it's to Afghanistan or Iraq, but, like, as an Army captain, he outranks me. I would have to call him sir, but I have more military experience than him, and everybody would
Right.
probably treat us that way if we were, on an active duty deployment together. And I mean, the Secretary of Defense, in theory, doesn't have to have any military experience and at all. Colin Powell, for example, I believe, was enlisted. He was like a private or something and went on to be a very respected Secretary of Defense. But, this man literally stood in front of a group of men and women, every one of whom was passed up for the job when it went to him, right? And talked about DEI and things being handed to you and, like, not earning your place. I mean, it is just.
And there was a lot of language about being apolitical, but then they start making these political arguments, right? They use terminology like the radical left, and no, Hegseth said specifically, no more identity month-long celebrations, dudes in dresses, quote unquote. Just language that, you used the word professionalism a moment ago, and I agree with you. A lot of times that terminology is used to disparage the work of marginalized groups in our country. But if he was being held to his own standard of professionalism, to me that language doesn't incite respect. It doesn't say, man, this guy is somebody that is above the fray. To me, all it communicated today was, it really did remind me of those insecure young men who think they have it all figured out and that might makes right. The bullies, right? That puff their chest out, that say, this is who we are, Mr. Macho. And in my experience, and I'm sure in your experience as well, most men that talk that way can't back up what they're saying. It is a sign of insecurity.
And that's why it's frustrating, right? Because I mean, first of all, anyone that just has that much confidence that they're right is somebody you don't want to trust, right? Because
Right.
intellectual
Yeah.
humility, we all need to have. But like, they have simply never listened to anyone else's point of view. And so, like, he's going to do this. He's going to affect the military. It's going to take years, if not decades, to recover from. And, like, it's not going to work. Like, we all know that dragging us backward is not going to work. We all know that the straight white military is not getting you what you need in a modern world. But the best thing I saw was a creator, Amanda's Nelson. She just posted, it's the Mojo Dojo Casa house. Like, yes. We are in the Mojo Dojo Casa Military right now. Like, that's what that was. That's the part of the movie that we're in.
Yeah, it feels like an episode of Cobra Kai, right? All of the Karate Kid, gesturing and the posturing and the macho talk and the trash talking. It's just it makes good television, but it makes horrible, horrible policy, right, in the
Right.
real world.
Right. And
We
that's
don't
so
want people
much.
acting that way.
That's what they're doing, right? It's all
Hmm.
show. It's all, I believe I said after the election, like, we know two things. He's going to test every check and balance of America, and he's going to be on television every day, right? Like, he's going to find a reason to be on television every day. And not to mention, like, I low key think this whole thing was just to distract from Trump having a bad news cycle last week, right? There's absolutely no reason that this would have been called on this short notice to be anything other than, hey, you got to take one for the team now, so you're gonna do this. And one of the things I was telling my audience is, like, notice they could have said what the meeting was about, right? They came out and said it later that day. They could have said it right at the beginning, but they didn't, because it's all a show, because they wanted people to spin up. And I mean, that one got me really nervous, until I literally calculated that 800 generals sitting in front of that man is 24,000 years of military experience. But, that's also, like, somebody asked me today, they're like, so how do we know? Like, how do we know that the military is going to, and the answer is you don't. Like, we're just going to have to trust, just those generals. That's 24,000 years of military experience. We're just going to have to trust the 2 million Americans and immigrants and everyone that make up our military is not going to follow a tyrant. And we can comfort ourselves by knowing that if they do, then we, the people, need to turn against them, and we, the people, will win. Some of us will die, but 360 million people with 500 million firearms beat the United States military very decisively. Not to
Yeah.
mention we have 13 million veterans. A lot of us feeling pretty pissed off, and all of us have the area of expertise that is beating the American military with low-tech tactics.
Yeah, and after the speech, I caught a snippet of, is it General Westmoreland, that served under was it the Clinton administration? I can't recall, but he was saying, all of the political aspects of it, and the fact that Hegseth name checked General Milley, who served in the first Trump administration, but now is persona non grata because he dared to call out the president. That general is still respected by the military officers that were sitting there. And as you pointed out, all of the women, all of the black officers, the black generals that were in the audience, they were listening to all of this as well. And I think at some point, that whatever that looks like, and I'm assuming that the military is like any other organization. When they get in private, I'm sure that they talk about these things, even though I think it was you that pointed out that they're pretty tight-lipped when it comes to what they say of a political nature in public.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, that's like one of the main rules about being active duty in the military, is like, you are not supposed to bring your politics into work or into any space that you're in uniform. And since the advent of social media, that has extended to, social media a lot of times. Like, if you can be identified as a US soldier, you shouldn't be just like posting random stuff. That being said, in reality, like, yeah, you usually know the politics of the people you serve with because you get to know people, right? And you have all of these conversations, but you are all supposed to put professionalism and the Constitution above that. And that is, I think, the thing that should give Americans some comfort is that, the US military is a cult and it's a pretty strong cult, but it is a cult that is led by the idea of loyalty to the Constitution, right? So the president is not the cult leader. The president is just the first guy on the totem pole of the cult leadership. And so if he really were to strongly go against the Constitution in an obvious way, I think you would get a lot of pushback. And there's no version of using the American military, other than the National Guard with some pretty strict parameters, in America that doesn't violate the Constitution.
And we
And I
do have
do think that you
examples.
would get pushback from Republicans and Democrats in the military. I think you have about a 10% that are extreme enough that they would do whatever Trump wants, but I definitely don't think you have a tipping point for military operations to follow a tyrant.
And we do have examples of this historically, even though it was a different fighting force. It was one that was drafted. Certainly in Vietnam, you have examples of soldiers not following through on orders and things of that nature because they were so discouraged and disillusioned with the mission that was happening in Vietnam. And plus they were there not on a volunteer basis. Even though it's an all volunteer force, I would think that those same cultural characteristics still exist within people, right? People are people, and if they see lunacy at the top,
Yeah.
they're gonna really be reluctant to follow through.
And people and soldiers like only have more rights and more visibility, right? So like in Vietnam times, if you didn't get drafted, like real bad stuff was going to happen to you. In modern times, like if you go AWOL, they don't even usually bother to look for you, right? AWOL is absent without leave, like people can just not show up for work. They can just walk off their jobs, right? At some point, you and what army are going to come get us? You know, they're, that's what I want people to realize. Like, this is not, I mean, I don't know if we've had this at all since World War I even, but like, this is not like point and shoot or I'm going to shoot you military, right? Like the worst possible thing that's going to happen to you if you refuse an illegal order is you're going to spend some time sitting in a military jail. That's the worst possible thing, right? You're not going to get a firing squad. You're not going to, have all of your land taken from you and be thrown in prison and have your descendants disinherited. Like, I think most people in the military would take losing their career, getting bad paperwork or spending some time in jail over turning their weapons on American citizens. Like you said, like people have morals. It's hard under any situation to convince people to go to war against their own country.
Right. And you're dealing, you're dealing also with young people, and you're dealing with young people that have volunteered for this, but maybe not necessarily for whatever they are asked to do by the commander in chief. Because I imagine that even in the situations where you were at, you had to deal with younger people that were maybe reluctant, that were like, I volunteered, but I didn't know it was going to be all of this. Does that make sense?
And they just, Gen Z just expects their personhood to be respected.
Yeah.
And it's pretty incredible, I think. And this is, the other thing I tell the people, it's like they showed you a bunch of generals, but like millennials are battalion commanders, right? Like my friends that I was lieutenants with in the military are the battalion commanders right now. And Gen Z makes up the base of the soldiers. And like, that's who does the missions. That's who does the stuff. And it is a very diverse population. It is a very woke population, and the military has always sort of over indexed for accepting societal change faster than the rest of the population. And I think that They couldn't even keep minorities and women out back when they had all the power and no historical evidence to show, yes, it's better. And now we have all of this evidence.
And I think we've all had to be in a position where we had to endure or listen or follow through on directions given by someone we know is incredibly unqualified for the position that they hold. And I just got to believe, with all of the incredible expertise and experience that was sitting in that room, even if they're not allowed to say it,
Right.
by what they witnessed, they had to be thinking, what qualifies this guy? And after listening to him, he seems even less qualified, you know?
Right. No, I mean, I'm sure that the large majority of them was sitting there literally going, what dystopian reality is this? Right? Is this I have a friend who's a lieutenant colonel, but in Canada's army, so he's been messaging me to see how I'm doing, and he's like, it's like finding out you just dedicated your whole life to the Constitution of Oz, and now you're just finding out that the whole thing is a clown circus. But like, if you had known that, you might have not dedicated your lives to this. This is a room full of generals and admirals going, the organization I worked for, I gave my life to, is going to be broken by this toxic dude. And that's all they're going to get to see. They're not going to live long enough to see it recover. They're just going to get to see it get worse.
Some people tried to make something of them not applauding or saying anything. In fact, when Trump came out, he tried to encourage them to applaud, but that's pretty standard protocol, right? They're a group of officers, and they're not going to applaud even the president or the Secretary of Defense.
We're not an applauding crowd. We're not a smiling crowd. I mean, sometimes there is an applause afterward, but you also have to have certain things, like you have to tell them at ease if they're at attention. Otherwise, they can't give you an applause. And then at the end, I mean, people are making too much of it. As the Secretary of Defense finished speaking, somebody called the room to attention, which is one, military protocol. Two, reminds you that he actually does outrank all of these generals. It reminds them too. But yeah, nobody can applaud from the position of attention. Now, had that gone better, would he have stood around on stage waiting for an applause? Maybe. But yeah, I mean, I just think, I don't know if you've seen the pictures of all the generals just sitting there stone face, but I just think of how honestly terrified he must have been, just knowing how much of those people hate him. But he also knows he has the power right now.
And what's really cool is that you write about this in Uncultured, but also in your forthcoming book, The Culting of America. We've talked about it on this program, and a lot of this, the timing is for your book is just perfect. Sadly.
Even with Uncultured, like I just happened to be reading the part today where I found out about the combat ban and basic training, and I was like, what? And I mean, yeah, it is. This is well, I mean, I know you're seeing it from the like evangelical side as well. It's just like we know, we know what is happening. Had written the sentence, "We are living through the culting of America," as like copy to go with Uncultured. And my publisher was like, "Can you write that book?" And so it is, yeah, I got it right, but that it sucks because I'm a cult scholar and I talk about the president of the United States every day.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about your book, though.
Yeah. Speaking of books, mine is out. It's called The God That I Was Given, Looking for Faith After Losing My Religion, and sort of details my journey out of the cult of the United Pentecostal Church. And I sort of come at it from the angle of memoir, of kind of recounting my experiences. But like any good memoir, I think people will be able to see a lot of their experiences reflected through my own. In fact, I talked with someone just yesterday, and he was telling me, even though his experience was different, the details were different, so much of what I shared resonated with his own experience of growing up in a rural setting, that was dominated by religious cult practices. And then I sort of take the reader through the journey of my evolution over a decade or more, and sort of where I land at today, still identifying as a Christian, but certainly rejecting all of the cultic practices of the United Pentecostal Church. That's in a nutshell what it's all about.
Yeah. So, as a white man who has
Hmm.
deconstructed sort of from a position of privilege, right? Because you were a pastor in the church, in addition to being a cult baby. Like, what does that feel like? I guess, like, in the context of everything we're seeing right now with the country.
Yeah, and so you bring up the privilege and the status, and certainly I recognize that everything that I say, even on this side of it, I am speaking from a place of privilege. And so, when we have these conversations about what's happening in the nation right now, I understand that there are people to the left of me on the political spectrum that look at the state of the country and they say, to hell with it, let's burn it down and start over and build something better. And when I hear people talk like that, I'm like, that does make me a little nervous, just if I'm being honest. But I understand that from their perspective, they are experiencing already a lot of the things that I fear. And the only reason that I'm insulated from it is because this country was built for me by people who look like me. So
Yeah.
it was built by people who look like me for people that look like me. And so that's why I get a little nervous when people start talking about revolution or starting over. And the same way, right? So I think that perhaps if I was in a different place, or if my status was different in the United States, I think the resolution of my book would certainly be different. I do catch a little bit of criticism, and rightly so, because I don't separate completely from Christianity, or I don't separate completely from everything that I believed in my youth. And I understand that perspective. But I think the reason that I have that is because, again, of the privilege and the status that I enjoy as a white male in this nation. I don't know how to completely separate myself from that other than to acknowledge it and to continue to move forward with intellectual humility, understanding that I don't have it all figured out. I don't know what I don't know. And that people like yourself, a woman in America, and certainly Black women and Black men in America, or people of color, have a better perspective than I do on the inequalities that exist in this nation and that are often leveraged not only by white normative culture in the government, but also in these religious settings that all of us move in and out of, and certainly manifest themselves in cult groups that we talk a lot about on this program.
Well, I want to say I think you're a fantastic example. And I think that the work of deconstructing out loud and letting people watch your journey, isn't for everyone. Like you said, like you're going to get criticism, right? I get criticism, right? No matter how careful we are. And you're so good at talking about this, about like how you understand, it's because you've had that privilege and that ties into that. I think there's a lot of value in your book because you are not doing the binary knee jerk, I'm going as far away from religion as possible. Right. And like, nothing against that. I did that. But we have that perspective, and it's maybe even more comfortable for people to just reject everything, but that doesn't have to be everyone's journey. And I think part of what we often struggle with after high control, especially childhoods and adulthoods, is understanding that you can choose. Like you can choose to be, find the relationship with God that you want, right? Be in Christianity or in any belief system or in anything. I'm going through it right now with working out. I
Uh-huh.
was in the cult of the army and the working out and the running, and like it just struck me the other day. I was like, I don't even know if I like running. Like I don't even know if I like working out. But I know that that relationship with working out was unhealthy. The one where I thought I had to
Yeah.
punish my body and do this stuff and blah blah blah. And I
I
want to
think you
find a healthy one.
I think you did like leaving all of those men in the dust when you
I
ran
mean,
past them.
that was pretty epic for sure. But I just wanted to say, like, I think part of the value of your book to our listeners, whether, right, like I have never been religious. Part of the value of your book to me is the not choosing the binary, like choosing your life the way you want to choose it, right? I can apply that to my relationship with exercise. It doesn't have to be
Absolutely.
just about Jesus. I think you've just done a really good job with that.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I do encourage folks to read it and to stay with it, because not only do I get that criticism from the left, but also from the right, right? People, even in my own family, who have chosen for various reasons to stay in that particular church. A lot of times, they read parts of the book, and I tell them, you're going to read parts of it and you're going to get angry with me, but stay with it. There's an arc, right? There's an evolution, and at the end you still might be angry with me, but I think you'll have a better understanding of where I'm at today. And a lot of the reasons that I'm working through what my faith looks like on this side of my deconstruction is not only philosophical, but it's also practical. I told my therapist the other day, I'm starting with a new therapist, and so I sort of have to, tell your story up front when you first check in. And I told her, I said, she asked about where I'm at in my faith, and I tried to explain it to her. And I said, a lot of it for me is practical as well, because I'm 54 years old, and there's, you know, generally speaking, I have less days left in this world than I have a previous. And so if I'm going to make some radical decisions that are going to upset my life, upset and disrupt everyone, I'm doing enough of that now. So if I come out and say, I'm convinced, I reject religion, I'm an atheist. And by the way, I believe that atheists have really, really good arguments. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I'm saying for me, I choose to still believe because it doesn't make a huge difference in how I live my life on a daily basis. It brings me a certain amount of comfort and peace and solace that I find in a belief system that helps me navigate the world. But that's true for everyone. And that's even true for those who reject religion altogether. They can find purpose and meaning and morality without the religious construct. But for me, it's more of a practical decision because I know that my decisions have ramifications and impact not only myself, but those that are around me. And so it becomes a cost benefit analysis, right? For me, how much benefit and how much cost and how much harm would decisions like that maybe inflict? And I might change my mind tomorrow. I might evolve even further. And there's always that possibility.
Well,
But as of today, this is where I'm at.
that's even, I think, implied in your subtitle, right? Is it finding God after losing my religion or searching for God? It's
Looking for
looking,
faith. Yeah. Looking for
right?
faith.
Like
Yeah.
it's not finished, right?
Yeah.
You
Right.
didn't choose finding faith after losing my religion, or you didn't choose like looking, right?
I
Like
was
it's
looking for
still
faith after losing religion.
future.
Yeah. So there's still
Yeah.
the possibility. Yeah.
And I
Of
still feel
something being
like
out
you're
there.
still working some of that out, but I think that
Right.
is true for writing. Like writing a memoir, something deep, something where you're like taking things that you went through that changed you and putting them into words. Like that's always going to open stuff up. And then I feel like, you'll go back and you'll look at it 3 years from now, which, Uncultured just turned 3. And it's like, yeah, different. I'm more different than I was. I'm more evolved in a lot of these things. I get some of the criticisms that I was very offended by 3 years ago. I get them now. And so it's interesting that it's like sort of this journey too, that you're still going to go on as an author after you finish.
And I don't believe I've ever had the opportunity to share this with you. I'll share it with you now. But I, like so many people, I discovered you on TikTok. So I was doing the thing, scrolling through it, and I come across your content. And initially, I was obviously impressed with your credentials and your ability to speak to these particular issues. But there was also some residual feelings like, who does this person think they are, right? Why is she so adamant and in my face about this? And so it made me upset initially, but that, I think that speaks more to my status, privilege, and power that I've enjoyed as a white male in the United States, right? So going back to attempting to understand what you were saying, but then the more I listened, right, the more I was like, she has a point. This makes sense. This resonates with my own experience in the United Pentecostal Church. And so that initial, right, that cognitive dissonance that everybody experiences when they are confronted with new information that doesn't necessarily align with how they've navigated the world up until that point. I experienced that when I first discovered you on TikTok. And I think we all go through that when we're confronted with new information that we doesn't necessarily resonate with the tools that we've been given to navigate the world up until we're confronted with that new information.
Yeah. And then the thing we never realize is that once I was just talking on my other podcast, Hey White Women, that once you click on that white privilege and you go to learn more, like it's not going to stop until you're trying to take down the entire system,
Right.
but I also want to say that's part of the power of your book as well, right? Is deconstructing the patriarchy to the patriarchy, right? Is from that white male position of power voice saying the things, right? Like one of my questions is, what feedback have you had from your audience?
Yeah, so it's been mixed, mostly positive, but I did have one family member who attempted to leave a 1-star review, a distant cousin, and she was like, half of, I think the wording was, half of everything that he's written is a lie, which I was curious about which half. And it was obvious, right, that she didn't read the book. And she said all of these things that I was saying, negative things about our grandmother, that she raised us to be racist and all of this. And that's certainly not the point that I was making. Certainly there was racism in the way that my grandmother interacted with people. There was racism in the way that my church interacted with my best friend. There was racism in the way that I responded to certain instances. And so I tell that story. And what I'm attempting to do through those stories is hold up a mirror and say, you know what, we can romanticize all of this if we want, but we're not telling the truth. And initially when it was coming out, I was having a conversation with my mother, who is 90 years old. And, she's attempting to, at the same time, hold the two ideas of being proud of her son for writing a book, but then also having to deal with all of the information that's in the book that doesn't necessarily reflect what she believes to be true. And the way that I tried to explain it to her is, Mom, if you read a book and it was just all rainbows and unicorns, that book wouldn't be very interesting to anyone. So you have to tell the good and the bad, and you have to tell all of the experiences for it to be real. And if you think about it, that's the human experience. That's what makes our relationships worth investing in. Not that they're perfect, and not that we never offend anyone, or not that we ever share with someone that we love something that hurts them and is also trying to help them. But it's the fact that we continue to love one another through all of that. That's reality. That's what a real relationship is. And so if I'm writing something, it needs to reflect that, because if I just told all of the good things and all of the good stories and all of the wonderful memories and then sort of whitewashed it with this palette of, it was all rainbows and unicorns, first of all, nobody wants to read that book, right? Because it's not true. There has to be a truth that resonates with our experience.
And I also think it's like, because I had this same sort of reaction, but it was from some of the male lieutenants who were on the team with me. And they were like, yeah, but, you didn't put any of the fun that we had, like the games, the blah, 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 the midnight runs. And I was like, I mean, I wish I could have, but I was so busy writing about it's like,
Yeah.
unfortunately, or it's, people ask me, they're like, so did you like your time in the military? Like, yeah, I did. When I said I was getting out, people were shocked. People were coming to me, ma'am, you're getting out of the military, but you love this. And I was like, yeah, I do. But unfortunately, it doesn't love me. Like it is not a good place for me. And I need to, I think with the deconstruction, right? It's like we know there were good things, but we need to pull apart the things that weren't good. And I think the thing that people do not believe, our family and our friends who haven't done the deconstruction, is that like once you pull it apart, then it's all your story to tell. The good, the bad, the ugly, like you don't have to pick. Like once and you know this because you're a great storyteller, but like, you can use the same story to illustrate a number of different things. And
Right.
you can tell the same story in a bunch of different ways. And, I can tell beautiful stories now about being a 5-year-old on the beaches in Brazil and, experiencing the world because I've told really ugly stories. And I think when you can't tell the really ugly stories, you don't actually get to the beautiful ones either.
Yeah. And that's something that I wish more people understood about you, because I do understand the limitations of social media, and you are doing a phenomenal job in getting your story out and educating people about cults and high control groups. But I think one of the things that, and it shows up in a lot of the comments that you have to address, right, is that people don't understand that you can be both proud of your military service, proud of what you accomplished, and you should be as an intelligence officer, what you accomplished not only as a person, but as a woman in the United States Army. You served this country valiantly. And at the same time, you can speak to the fact that it is a cult, and both things can be true at the same time.
And I think that other people need permission to know that they can do that too, if that makes sense. Like so many veteran women or even active duty women have just been like, man, the fact that you put it all there, like the things they say to us, like right next to the stuff you're proud of is the story that everyone thinks you're not going to tell because you want it to look good. And I think that both of us in the work that we do, like this is part of it, right? It is like opening up our stories and the bad stuff and the stuff that we struggled with, because it shows people and it models that like we're deconstructing all of it. It's a whole journey. We've got to go through all of it. And that's what I think is powerful. And to wrap this up with how we started, I'm just going to go back to like, these guys never listened to other people's stories. Like these guys have always been so sure that they're the main event and they're the good guys. And,
Yeah,
I don't think lack of introspection is going to work out in their favor. We know that diversity creates the best results, right? Like the results are in. So
absolutely.
hopefully,
Absolutely.
I don't even know what to hope tonight, but Scott, you did an audiobook. Tell people where they can find everything. You have a
Yeah.
great radio voice.
Well, I appreciate that. And I appreciate Thank you for all of the kind things that you said tonight about the book and about my work. You certainly don't owe me anything, but you were nice enough to say all of those things, and I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity every week to speak to your audience, an audience that you've built and you are generous to share. So thank you for that. My book, The God I Was Given, Looking for Faith After Losing My Religion, is available on Amazon, and it's an audio book as well, and I read it. So if you have about, I think it's 9 hours and 40 minutes, you can listen to the whole thing, or you can split it up. But thank you, Daniella. And your book, The Culting of America, is available for pre-order as well, right?
Yes, it's all linked. You can even buy the audio, even though I haven't recorded it yet. So it's like cool Schrodinger's audio. But yeah, this reminds me, actually, I'm going to go listen to your audio before I do because I'm putting the book club list together now. So it's going to give me
Thank
lots
you.
of good ideas.
Well,
All
I
right.
appreciate it very much. And thank you all for tuning in to this edition of Cults and the Culting of America. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends and family or someone that could benefit from the content. Until next time, I'm Scot Loyd for knitting cult lady Daniella Mestyanek Young. We'll see you on the next episode of Cults and the Culting of America.